Hi, Jeff. Good to see you again. Hi,
Yeah.
Alexander. Nice to have you join Jeff and I. Jeff and I used to sitting
Yeah.
here, chatting away about various things.
Hi, Angus.
Um,
Hi, Jeff. Great to
Hi,
see you.
Alexander. Great to see you.
uh,
Angus, as always.
let's see. We have decided to do a new series, as you can see here from the title of the video, about Goethe's worldview, which corresponds to GA2 in the Gesamtausgabe of Steiner's works. And just before we actually launch into this, I thought each one of us is going to give a little reason why we think either why we've chosen to read this book, or certainly in my case, and I guess in Jeff's case as well, why we've chosen to read this important book again, and how it really adds to deepening into an understanding of what spiritual science, Goethean science, and also anthroposophy, where its roots lie. So I'm going to start. I think I listened to this book the first time. It was around about 3-4 years ago when I was putting a roof on our smithy, and I was absolutely blown away at how it helped me to resolve so many other things that I was struggling with then in the philosophy of freedom. And I'm not going to talk about what those things are now here, because that will actually be like our next session. But this really is a fantastic book for getting deeper into those questions that certainly initially appear to be treated rather superficially in the philosophy of freedom, so that it really becomes meaningful. These few sentences that we might stumble across there. Here we find it's like the importance and the roots of where that thinking is. So this is a hugely important book for understanding Steiner's later philosophical works, and purely for that reason, it's a hugely important book. Also because it simplifies, makes more explicit some of these difficult ideas, new ideas. Jeff, Alexander, would you like to chime in there? Why are you reading it? Why are you reading it again?
Well, first of all, I'm very thankful to be reading it again. I'm not sure I would have pointed myself to it, and sort of in the continuation of my work with Steiner's work, particularly the epistemology. But in reading the preface, I'm reminded why I'm engaged with this as a larger project, anthroposophy, and its relevance to the questions of our time, to the social questions of our time, to the technological questions of our time, to the science, the need for science to be grounded in something that is real. And it's really, as I read the preface, I'm really struck by the way in which what he is doing is so utterly simple in a way. It's existentially simple, but we have covered up the origin of our I won't say existence at this point, but the origin of our existential problems, and the solution to those existential problems in the realm of experience. And this is a debated issue in philosophy, because experience is prejudicially thought of as merely subjective, and so it's eliminated experience as a way to verify, justify, make valid the most important questions of our time, and to root them in something that would produce something fruitful. And we haven't, as a society, we haven't solved this problem because we haven't really examined what thinking is. And that's startling in a certain sense to me, and it's obvious, and it needs to be made obvious to as many people who are willing to hear what it is to be a human being, the nature of what it is to be a human being, or who we are in nature in relationship to something unified, rather than something claimed to be unified but experienced as such. And so that's why I find this to be an important existential statement, or an important existential process to work with this. That's what I really want to say. That he's addressing the questions of his time, knowing that they are going to be troubled waters. There's going to be troubled waters if we don't address the very genesis of human production and creation. If we don't do that, we're going to be in trouble. And the existentialists knew this, Nietzsche particularly, and the answers were abstract at the time, and Steiner's the only one during this time that really started from the place we need to be starting from, and that is a place that needs to be returned to regularly to stay grounded in reality for our all the branches of science that we are meant to practice and are subject to. So that's what I'm finding so relevant in this reading, but also the desire to read it.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I'm not reading this text again. I'm reading it for the first time. And yeah, this comes from an invitation from you, Angus. We had some conversations before about, at least for me personally, what the difference between Goethean science and spiritual science could be, and how sort of to track the way our thinking and consciousness can develop, especially for me personally, spiritual science, because that threshold between Goethean and spiritual science, for me, it feels still a bit difficult to grasp. But having worked with Goethean science for a few years now, in different ways, and studies that I've done, exercises, it became apparent to me that the threshold from materialistic science to Goethean science is opened up, and it clarified for me quite well how one can develop the senses, and especially the how do you say them now? The senses beyond the physical senses, that we are able to so that we are able to describe and see into the world from a Goethean perspective. So I think that feels interesting and important to look into this text, how Steiner describes that process and those differences between materialistic and Goethean science, and the importance of Goethe's work. And when I was listening to you, I was thinking about something a person once asked me when I was actually doing a course on Goetheanism, which the person said, "I've never understood the purpose of Goethean science. What's the use of it? I mean, it's beautiful, but what is the use of it?" And for me, I remember that the answer that came up then was, well, with Goethean science, we can make better ethical choices, how we treat and approach nature, to begin with, because to begin with, Goethean science has very much to do with understanding the natural phenomenal world. I think it develops a true and safe ground to make better ethical choices. So that's one of the values that I think Goetheanism carries, and I'm happy to be exploring these things with you.
May I ask a question, Alexander?
Yeah.
That question, what's the difference between Goethean science and spiritual science? Is there a difference? Is there meant to be a difference? Is Goethean science? This is not an answer, by the way. I'm exploring this because I really haven't thought about this, and it's an intriguing question. And I think there are definitely people who draw the line. I know that, and that we have a interlocutor who's shall not be named here, who often is drawing that line and insistent that actually the line be drawn almost as a hard line, or as maybe even only accepting Goethean science and not spiritual science. So it's hard to say if that's what's motivating it, but I guess I think that in this question, isn't spiritual science that which envelops Goethean science? Isn't Goethean science a method within the larger project of spiritual science? I guess that's my question.
Yeah. I would spontaneously feel that, well, that's valid to say it like that. I think when me and Angus was speaking, one thing that I was struggling with is in Goethean science, you still use the phenomenal world and the physical senses to read into what is hidden. Whereas with spiritual science, it feels that it is, well, there's another dimension. And I'm thinking of Steiner's very clear depiction of evolution, and how he can create physical pictures, physical in the sense that you can visualize physical realities that go beyond time. So there's no physical phenomenal trace that we could observe now with our physical senses to derive those descriptions. So for me, there's one that was where I was sort of finding the difficulty, and seeing that, well, then is spiritual science what is giving Steiner, or would spiritual science be that factor, that kind of activity that enables us to look into the distant past and as well the future, in a way where we can derive true descriptions of what has been and what can potentially be. And that's different from Goethean science, I think.
It's interesting. Already now, I would argue we are using the Goethean method to investigate this, because we're positing. So the question becomes, what's the difference, which is a polarizing, and then there's a Jeff sort of is there any difference, the extent to which they're the same as well. And this is one of the central aspects of bringing in Goethean approach to it's through the observation of the plant we see this intensification, polarization, these processes going on. So like if we look at the seven phases of the plant, from seed to leaf to bud to flower to what would it be, the stamen and the pistil, to the fruit, and then the stamen and the pistil, and then finally back to the seed again. And one of the things that is like central to Goethe's idea in the archetypal plant here is this idea of, it's like polarization, which we have through that midpoint of the flower at the top. That's like you've got these outward movements, intensifications on the initial growing side, from the seeds to the leaf to the bud, and then this evolution starts to go on inside, which starts in the flower and then becomes the fruit, pistil, and the stamen, and so on. And this isn't that this has come up is both beautiful, but also at the same time not by chance, because this is also the method that Steiner, consciously or subconsciously, compels us to do, both in this work and in the philosophy of freedom. If you start at the beginning, or if we will just, I'll make the occasional reference to the philosophy of freedom, but here it's like in his preface, his new preface to this work, he starts out by talking about, it's like, I had two thought activities, he even says. It's like, in my mind when I wrote this. So he's already setting up the polarity. And actually the whole time throughout this book, we are going to be living in that thought form, that thought polarity. But we move through it in a really, really interesting way, because the questions that naturally begin to occur in us once we begin to delve into the matter. So this polarization and unification is inevitable. And each time it's not about getting a yes or a no answer. It's about clarification. And what do we win by separating them out? What do we win by bringing them together? So interesting that we started off on that foot without having planned it.
This is great, man. This is really great. Like, so why did he do this? Right? Why did he write this? Why was he interested in explicating that which is implicit in Goethe's scientific work? Why do that? Right? Why does he make epistemology central to, as process, central to all of anthroposophy? It's a question I have, and I think it begins to speak to the bridge between what spiritual science is and what Goethean science is. That, for example, if this is a harangue that I go on occasionally, which is that if psychology would have taken this up, it's so obvious, right? Like, psychology doesn't deal with the phenomenological reality of soul spiritual realities in our psychology, in our individual frames, in what it is to be a human being from a psycho-spiritual standpoint. And it seems to me that the attempt of Goethean science is to turn the human being into an instrument that can also perform spiritual science, right? That we're making transparent that which is the cosmos in our single instantiation as a person. And so, to me, you hit on the Alexander, you hit on the point, which is that Goethean science is a phenomenology, but so is psychosophy of a phenomenology, and then so is his cosmological output a phenomenology. They're just using different aspects of what it is to be a human being. One is, as Angus so beautifully points out, is cosmological in its proportions. One is micro cosmological in its proportions, and we are the mediating factor in between. And so the Goethean emphasis on the human being as instrument is really important, and people who are into spiritual science, not its results, right? Like occult science is a process you go through, and you can check it against the epistemology in order to find the phenomena that is experienceable on some level, experienceable, even as fantastic as some of the descriptions are. If you can, it's meant for everybody. This is the other thing about this chapter, and it's a polarities. Is he starts off with this preface. He starts off by talking about Goethe, the human being, and how well-rounded and what a full human being he was, right? Not perfect, of course, and there's all sorts of catty takedowns of his life, right? His biography, but as a whole person, he was a central figure, a representative human being of his time and probably our time, and so much so that Hegel and Schopenhauer, diametrically opposed in their worldviews, both thought that Goethe represented their worldview, right? So I'm not answering this question that I'm asking, but I'm living into the threefold phenomenological reality that I think is the connective tissue that is what he refers to in this preface as unified, but not uniform.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think what's also interesting is, well, one aspect is Goethean science as a science in our days, it is applicable in different areas. And it seems to have, or it has sort of a more or less defined method to it. And there's philosophers and scientists that have been working with this. For example, the Nature Institute and Craig Holridge in the US. So trying to develop a process, a method, a way of approaching science that is, and clarifying it so that you end with a way of doing Goethean science that, well, I'm not going to say universal, but that can be shared among practitioners. But also when I was, before reading this book and a little bit coming from the conversations that I and Angus had, I was sort of thinking, but there's already sort of an archetypal way of how consciousness and cognition works that becomes explicit in Goethean science or in Goethean method. I was remembering how when I was a student at university, I was working with integral mathematics. Is that the expression in English? Mm-hmm. Which was very abstract for me.
Calculus, okay.
Calculus, okay. Yeah. Integrals in mathematics and calculus, yeah. Very abstract to me. I was sort of wondering, what am I sort of doing here with this complex studies? And I had a colleague that was quite good at it. So good that he even created a small program in his scientific calculator that could create geometrical figures of those equations. And visualizing those figures helped me understand what those numbers and equations were about. And then when I was recalling this from back then, I realized that is a sort of or it's not different from what we in Goethean science call imagination. So I went from something that was sort of scattered bits here and there of numbers, equation theories, and then this visualization of the result allowed me to link those scattered thoughts into a whole understanding of what calculus was sort of about. And that is not different from imagination. And this was in sort of mathematics, which we would call a hard science today, isn't it? So in a way, I think it's not that Goethean science has sort of is a method where imagination, inspiration, and intuition is the tools that you use to practice Goethean science. Well, that's one aspect. I think it's important, but it's like through Goethean science we uncover how our consciousness really works, whether we're doing hard science, Goethean science, poetry, spiritual science. So it's not like, yeah, I mean, it is looking into consciousness directly.
Yeah, it's really interesting the way that you phrase that, Alexander, because just before we started talking, we had this question: what is philosophy? This is essentially what you described there. Is at the essence of what's going to be expanded upon in this book. So a philosophy is my way of understanding the ontology, the being of life, and how do I know about it. And one of the points that he makes, it's like in the second chapter of in the second paragraph of the preface, but also in I think it's the second paragraph of in Ausgangspunkt, the first chapter. So I'm getting it mixed up with paragraphs and chapters, but the first chapter also, which is called Point of Departure. This is exactly where he's coming from. He's talking about we are so stuck. I'm going back to the 1880s when I say that. We as philosophers, because Steiner was a philosopher, are so stuck in the Kantian mindset, which is a form of psychism. Psychism in the sense that everything is just in my head. What is in my head has nothing to do with any reality out there, because it's like the Kantians, that they've put it behind a curtain. It's like a metaphysical curtain, which means we can never know reality. And what Goethe is doing is he's demonstrating to Steiner, as he's studying him, that he has a fundamentally different philosophy on what being is and how we get to know being. And he does talk about other keywords that you picked up on there, because he talks about how the human being is losing itself in the philosophy in its current state. So the philosophy used to serve the human being, helping him to find his place in life, and to give him the reasons to do certain things and to not do other things. And he's saying, these philosophers now, they've taken up such an extreme position where they want nothing to do with real life. That's like that. What actually science is teaching us, they want to. I'm paraphrasing; these are my own words. They want to live in their ivory towers. They want to live in their behind the curtain in that metaphysical world, which they already know has nothing to do, according to their thinking, has nothing to do with this world, and so which has a paralyzing effect on the soul. If you believe that you cannot know the world, that is, you either negate that, and he'll talk about that in Philosophy of Freedom more amply, but you can negate that, or you can just, okay, let's just get on with it. If I'm living in a dream, I'm living in a dream, and I might be deluding myself. And he's saying, no, there is an answer. So this in this second in this second paragraph of the preface, he talks about Liebman and about consciousness, the role of consciousness that you highlighted there. That's like something has to live within consciousness. So he's picking up all of these useful threads that the Kantians are pointing out. It's like, so you can't jump over consciousness. Yeah, but the Kantians aren't able then to like take that further and what that means. And he'll talk about Foucault, who while still being stuck in his Kantianism, so like says, well, but we still do seem to somehow get close to reality with these abstract concepts that have nothing to do with reality. Isn't that a strange thing? So he's really depicting there how philosophy itself is lost in its understanding of what consciousness is, what representations are, and how they are linked to this process of knowing, which is so important for us as human beings. Because if we don't understand the world, if we don't have adequate concepts to make sense of what is going on around us, this has this deadening effect on our will. I don't know what to do because I don't have the adequate concepts. It's like, if let's say mathematics, somebody can, so you can be really like struggling like in this world of like jumbled up differential calculus and integration and of this integral calculus, and not being able to make sense of it. And then something comes along, like you were describing, Alexander, which like puts it back into a whole where all of those separate parts of my mathematical knowledge in this case, which we can then apply to life, they all actually do form a whole. I have created in myself this ability to unite these disparate elements that are sort of like all dotted around. So I thought that was really interesting, this in this second paragraph. I don't know if anybody would like to jump in there and add any further thoughts.
Yeah, I want to go back also to what Alexander said toward the end there, which is about imagination, and well, what I took from it is creativity. In other words, we in our interaction, it's part of human nature to be artists, and not in the Kantian sense, which is really plagues our whole artistic cultural scene, is that it's somewhat uniform in its rejection of human creativity as a reality, as opposed to what it adopts as a subjectivity, in that, art is something you like gluing macaroni on paper, it's like arts and crafts, whereas what Steiner says surrounding philosophy of freedom is that every philosopher worth their value as a human being is an artist in concepts, right? That's the medium, and we create in our interface when we come to have an imagination of nature that is real, right? But we have to create that. We have to create through imaginative interaction, and we can't even see anything if we don't have an imagination. Like concepts are distilled imaginations, right? A single concept is a picture that's worth 1,000 words, you could say. And this idea that it's interesting to me in this preface that he's wrestling with with science and philosophy as if they're somehow well, first of all, it's his epistemological process is a scientific process that involves creativity, and that is a transformation of the self as a intimizing with nature, becoming more intimate with nature, with the nature of things, with reality, an ontological complex that we flatten out when we separate philosophy and science, or hard sciences versus versus a science that is also an artistic act, right? So we've separated it out into in our culture, into science, into some sort of institutional discipline that is somehow objective without the subjective interaction it actually takes to know things, right? So this is part of this question of what is philosophy, is what is science, and can you have science without an epistemology, without a philosophy, without a theory of knowledge? Can you properly see the world? And so here again for me is the question of why are we reading this? So imagination as a phenomenological reality is also one that that allows us to participate in creation. And also, to illustrate this, he makes this brilliant move where he compares the Kantian children, I like to call them, Kant's children. All of these characters are and most of the characters in our contemporary life are Kant's children. And he compares their singular perspective, we could say symptomatic of the specializations in scientific culture now, as they keep fragmenting, and they can't do an interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, holistic approach to science because of it. And he compares that with Goethe's infinite perspectives, right? Why does Goethe have an infinite perspectives? Because he lets the phenomena be the perspective. He sees through the phenomena. That's what I wanted to add in.
Right. I think later on in this first chapter, Steiner speaks about this difference, or how many people in his time were sort of caught up in one way of thinking or one category of object. And he brings up this aspect that you're saying, Jeff, about going from a very narrow perspective into an almost infinite perspective and a pluralism of ways of knowing the world. And and I think for me, Goethean science allowed me to expand my understanding of first of all of the natural world. I studied biodynamics many years ago and was able to apply Goethean science in a few ways. So the way I thought the natural world became much more expanded, differentiated. I could see things that I've see with my eyes, but also with my thinking. See things that were not there before, but and that I could verify. So not seeing things that weren't there before in this terms of a fantastical world, but based on my physical senses. And that has and at the same time, more or less, also being interested in looking into, or becoming aware of how that process of knowing was coming about, which I think, especially when that is done, it's like consciousness grounds itself in that expanded way of thinking. So I've seen how I can, throughout the years, just look into other aspects of my life or things that I'm doing, and sometimes just realizing, oh, here I am, I've been using imagination and inspiration to sort of work myself with a situation or a question. I mean, it has happened in work, and I don't work with biodynamics anymore. I work in social therapy. And it has also happened in other aspects. Studying movement and dance for a while, I also came across a type of work that a dance teacher from the US was sort of working with and introducing. She was sort of finding the patterns that were implicit in a form of dance that I was practicing. And I just realized, oh, she has been applying the Goethean method. But she had never heard of it. So yeah, it was interesting just to see that.
We talked about, I feel like I'm going to do this loop again, and perhaps somebody can move us out of this loop, but it feels intimately linked, and it's nice to give a concrete example. We ask these questions like, what is philosophy is, it's like understanding it's like the nature of being and knowing about it. And it's easy to be blind to all of these suppositions that we make. There's I can't remember which chapter it is. I think it might be the second or the third chapter, Task of Science, or Goethe according to Schiller. Steiner a couple of times uses this expression, I think, I'm going to transliterate it to English, the art of seeing. And this is a really powerful phrase, the art of seeing. What do you mean, the art of seeing? I see with my eyes, don't I? But really, when you begin to know thinking better, your perspective shifts and you realize something else. Now, I'd like to give a couple of examples. Going back to when I would guess I was 14, 15 in a chemistry lesson, and Mr. Smith, our chemistry teacher, we were talking about gas pressure. It's like, what does it mean? So like, if something has a high pressure in a balloon or a bottle or whatever. And Angus, he stuck his hand up, because you did that type of thing back then. He said, I don't know whether Mr. Smith asked this, so like, how would you visualize it? But that's exactly what I did. And I said, yes, so like lots of atoms are like bouncing, so like it's like really full with lots of atoms, and they've got a lot more energy and they're bouncing around in there. And he was very satisfied with that answer. But in expressing that picture of what high pressure is, I'm revealing a worldview that everything is sort of like is atoms. I'm not saying it's incorrect in any way, but I'm revealing sort of like, I break down nature into its atoms. And when I try to explain gas, I am thinking about it in terms of, it's like these little balls of atoms, protons, neutrons, and electrons that are like bouncing around in there, creating what we experience. But of course, all of that is not what I immediately experience pressure as being. As a human being, I experience it as hardness. And how this differs from what Goethean, the Goethean phenomenological perspective is, and Steiner actually talks about this in also in the preface, where he talks about, he wrote an article about atomism, and he got some praise from Fischer about it, and he was really pleased. It's a bit surprising to read that, though. Steiner so would note that he was pleased that he got it, but he's at pains to say he's doing it from a different perspective. And what is this perspective? It's this perspective that it is the same as Goethe's, is that ultimately all matter itself is an expression of the spirit, and that if you are someone like Steiner who with, as I say earlier in the preface, with mathematical clarity, I can demonstrate why this why there is this relationship between matter and the spirit. Then I begin to view things from a completely different perspective. Now, if I had a bit more, if the inspiration was flowing, I would be able to revisit that lesson with Mr. Smith when I was 14, 15, and say, think of other ways other than atomic, particles bouncing around, as a way of explaining what I'm experiencing, or understanding. I don't know whether it's about explaining or understanding. Perhaps I might think of it in terms of heat. I don't know. And so as a pressure might be somehow related to heat. So I feel like I'm losing it a little bit there as to where to take that, and that might come as we continue talking about it. But this key phrase that I wanted to highlight that's used is this art of seeing, because hidden behind that idea is we become conscious of what are these suppositions that we have about the way the world works. It's what its basic ontology is, and that makes certain questions either possible or impossible. And what he's reacting to in part here is this strong Kantian bias that's in our thinking, and that we have to go beyond it, and that Goethe is also is an example of somebody who has managed through his whole being to go beyond Kantianism, and without ever specifically stating his own philosophical principles and axioms, he is actually living in that notion of the world where the spirit living in the thing, the spirit living in the phenomena, if I can get to know of that essence by the way that I observe it. So instead of imposing my understanding of the world, I let the world talk to me, which is, as we all know here, it's phenomenology 101. And art of seeing is a really a powerful combination of 2 words or 3 words to make us realize that how this is different, understanding how we see with our thinking, always hidden there in the background, even if we don't think it's there.
Steiner mentions in the beginning of this preface, Goethe's, I think it's an essay, but a work called "The Perceptive Power of Thinking." That's what I'm thinking of as you're talking about that thinking is a perceptual activity as well as a conceiving activity. Alexander said something just beautiful, worth quoting. He said, "My consciousness grounds in that which is expansive." Like This is exactly the opposite of the Kantian move, which is to ground yourself in something that is reductive or contractive, and to use the contractive grounding, which is the opposite of what Hegel did, to use the contractive grounding in that which is truly universal in what it is to be a human being, is what the gist of that is. It's in a phrase, right? And you mentioned biodynamics, which is the perfect example, because it is Goethean science and cosmology, right? Spiritual science in one thing. You can't get to the being of a plant if it's only observation of phenomena that exist, and you keep your mind shuttered in a reductive frame of mind or a contractive frame of mind. If grounding is a religious principle, you're in trouble. If grounding is a spiritual principle, I'm making an institutional differentiation here, then you're at play with reality, which is the cosmic forces working into a plant, such that the plant's colors are determined by the particular soul, spiritual, atmospheric infusion of that plant with a gesture of cosmological import, something like that. It's gorgeous, really. I'll carry that with me for the rest of my life. That's a beautiful, beautiful phrase.
Thank you.
And just picking up on something that you said specifically there, Jeff, which is also indicative of this Goethean process. So you talked about contraction. So this is when describing the Goethean method, one way of looking at it is how we see reflection, polarity, or this intensification or contraction. That this is also a very typical movement. We're creating growth in the gesture of intensification or contraction, and then that actually leads to something else growing out of there as we intensify it. But it's continually in movement. So,
can I just make a quick statement, because Angus, you brought up earlier being. And what our world is, our current world is void of, is a excuse me, an intimacy with being, including being with each other. The idea that the world is populated by beings that we see and don't see just does not occur to us, because we've reduced what a human being is to something that is either subjective or right. So this is an old harangue, but this is why this work is so relevant. And this is why other works adjacent to us to anthroposophy are so relevant, like the work of Zach Stein and Mark Gaffney and Ken Wilber in their attempt to do something like an anthroposophical move by recognizing value inherent to the natural world, to existence, that there's something intelligent and valuable to become intimate with. And I think the one thing that picture misses is that it's being that is part of every organic system, is being in its originating nature, in its participation as part of as a universal, say. And this is it's a hard one to get a hold of, because we just don't have the language for well, here's what I was thinking, actually. So what we're talking about is polarities, and you described expansive and contractive polarities that are at work as reality. Like nobody would deny that. Like it's a common sense statement. But if we start to think about, if we go only contractive, then we become one-sided as beings. and we're participating in beinghood. If I can butcher a phrase, we're participating in beinghood that is then one-sided, and so what we would call eremonic, right? So our science and our technologies and our philosophies become ideologically contractive, and there are beings that stand behind that are infused in that process. They're not inherently evil. It's the one-sidedness that's evil. That's why this work is so crucial existentially to his time, but even more so our time now. And I've argued often that the Waldorf schools really need to take up the Steiner's philosophy explicitly in the later years of the junior and senior years, perhaps. The real epistemological owning of the education that they've just experienced as the continuity that they then can carry into adulthood. This is crucial work, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree there. I think Waldorf schooling, in a way, it is preparing the young child and the young adult to develop the organs of consciousness that allow imagination, inspiration, and intuition to become aware, for one to become aware of them and learn how to work with them and develop them and apply them into the world. So the potential is there. I haven't been directly involved in any Waldorf school, so I don't know if that is actually being developed in the way that you're saying, Jeff. If there's an awareness of the curriculum as having that potential, but for me, I see that that's one of the aspects that Waldorf schooling can contribute to when relating it to the Goethean method or Goetheanism and anthroposophy and this work that we're specifically talking about.
There's another really pregnant phrase that Steiner uses in chapter 1, where he's talking about how the thinking of the time is predisposed to it's like a mechanical thinking. And then he goes on to talk about, but other people might choose like a more mystical, which is also like a hint at this metaphysical. It's like it's something like hidden. There's a hidden element that we can never know that's there. And then he makes this really interesting statement that you need to distinguish. In normal Kantian thinking, we are seeing it's the spirit of the observer that is central to what is going on and to what is being seen. This is the art of seeing. It's like what lives in my spirit determines what I see. So the spirit of the observer. And he says, whereas Goethe is the opposite. It's the spirit of the observed. So it is actually the content of my observation becomes responsible for generating the concepts that are in me. It's like I have to forget about myself. I have to lose myself for a while into the being of whatever it is that I'm observing. And this is how Goethe is fundamentally different. And I think this opposition that he sets up in is the eighth paragraph, ninth sentence of chapter 1. Really interesting. It's so crystal clear how Steiner is differentiating our standard way of understanding things and what it is that Goethe is trying to achieve in his methodology. My own understanding of the world becomes silent, and I let the world inform me of its own nature. The world has created this nature, and if I'm patient enough and if I ask the right questions, then eventually I'll coax out, the secrets will reveal themselves to me. And a well-known example of how this fundamentally different attitude expresses itself is when he receives the prisms, so that he can do his, it's like, investigate light. And he's learned that, so like Newton says this, that, and the other. So like that a light beam is like split into it's like the spectrum of colors when it passes through. It's like, you know, the needle hole, beam of light, prism, splitting type of idea. And he's really surprised when he does it, and he says, well, this isn't the results that I expected when I hold up and I view the world through the prism. So what is going on there? And he starts to do all of these different experiments, and he begins to see that like this, these spectrums are only producing themselves, it's like at the boundary between light and darkness. So he's actually working within the phenomena of light, and then he performs loads of other different experiments to like say, oh wow, it's like this light this light thing is a very curious observation. I can have nothing to do, I can have little to do with what Newton says about it, is because when I try to let light talk to me, I don't set up experiments to prove that light is a certain thing. I create a load of different situations in which light can show its nature, and then the lawfulness of that nature slowly reveals itself in the phenomena.
Can I ask Alexander a question?
Yep.
This is on the Goethean science side. Do you, when practicing the method, Goethean method, as you've developed it and practiced it, do you feel like you're being communicated to? Do you know what I mean? Like we're communicating with each other right now. That you experience something that's trying to communicate to you in a certain sense, or is an impulse that is there. Yeah, I
understand. I think what you're asking, I remember when first studying 20 plus years ago in the UK at Emerson College, it was very much a artistic course I was taking, and not explicitly Goethean science. So we were working a lot with poetry, creative writing, but we were doing exercises where, we were working with observing a plant and allowing it to sort of speak to us in a way. So that was my first experience of connecting with that type of openness, of allowing myself to being spoken to. It's not, of course, I wasn't feeling that the plant was speaking to me, but I was trying to find that threshold in me where I'm describing the phenomena, or let it sort of describe itself to me. So that's where it opened up, and later on, and as I've been sort of working with this, also in biodynamics, studying plants, but in a bit of a different way. I think the impression I have is that each new sort of threshold of understanding that comes to me, that is fresh, that is completely new, what you maybe would call an insight, has it's more, it has the, I was going to say the feeling, but it's more than a feeling. It's a clear impression of being spoken to in my thinking. And then and that's me. I've always been careful about saying, well, this is another entity, another being outside of my physical self that is speaking to me. I mean, I won't describe it that way, but it's an interesting experience of how when an insight or a not something that we know has again crystallized itself in our being, in our consciousness, the speaking feels that it comes from us. But if it's a new and fresh insight, it definitely feels to me that it is spoken to me. That's a clear distinction in the way I've felt things and working with Goethean science.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, I've been working with this idea that Wittgenstein puts forward, the great anthroposophical phenomenologist, that that kind of insight is actually not a deduction or induction, but an adducing, that is an invitation. Orland Bishop also talked beautifully about us being hosts in a certain sense, and that it's very clear to me that when you were talking, that I was listening to another being, right? It seems rather presumptuous to think that beingness stops at what it is to be a human being. My dog is a being. I can sense the presence of that dog. Where do we draw the line? Where do we say there's right? I don't have the answer to this, by the way. I'm asking the question because I am a modern child. I'm a Kantian child myself, right? I don't want to be. I know better, but I can't escape it to a certain extent, right? Because I'm a subject in a world full of objects, and I don't experience the intimacy with those objects except for in human relationships. And I'm wondering if human relationships are a ground that is I want to use your phrase is a grounding in the expansive intimacy that is also applicable in other spheres of inquiry, of other spheres of reality, both in a Michael Levin kind of sense, the biologist who speaks of light cones. He could be speaking of ontological generative cones or thinking cones, or intelligence cones or consciousness cones that are below us, as I described with my dog and people who are captured by ideological frameworks, who reduce themselves out of their own beinghood. And I can think of this in terms of what a being is. Like a being is an individual. My dog is a being that is a dog. The individuality of the dog is in its dogness, and in this way, I think that what you were saying about the dancing and the patterns, there's something gesturally emergent in knowing the other, whether it's each other or a plant, that is creating something new in interaction with the world that is novel, and that this is what it is to be spiritual. This is what spirituality, the spiritual world is. It's generating, it's constantly generating, and we're looking to participate in it. But I don't think we can do so without the kind of intimacy that invites beings who we can learn the language of, something like that. Also, I want to say beings have desire, right? So desire is one of the things he deals with gorgeously in the philosophy of freedom, and I didn't realize it until I read Wittgenstein's great essay treating the philosophy of freedom. Not an essay, it's a book, treating the philosophy of freedom as conceptual art. That desire is a fundamental urge that is underlying, Whiteheadian urge, say, that is underlying our existence and underlying existence itself, and I don't think it's out of the range of plausibility to suggest that there are beings higher than us that wish to speak, wish to express themselves, right? Or not higher than us, but more whole than us.
I'd like to build a little bit on what also on what Alexander was saying, this own experiences and how we move into whatever it is like we've decided to deepen into. We have a forest very close to us, and it's like I walk there once, twice, sometimes 3 times a day. So we've got a dog, and for many years, many years, I walk through that forest, and it's like I stop and I feel I take like the results from science. So I know there's the flow of the saps, like, which is on the edge of the tree. It's like one going up, one going down. So you've got this mutual interrelationship, and I can just try to live into that that dynamic that is going on there, the exchange between the root system and the leaf system, and then and so living into that also awakens its own questions. And then I can like look at the tree rings, and I can like wonder, so it might be apple trees, for example. What is going on there? It's like they continue to grow, but they can be really hollowed out. And you begin to understand how these forms are possible. It's like that the inside of the tree is completely dead, and it's like it rots away, but you still got a healthy tree producing apples there. And these, when I marry like the knowledge, the observations of the world with living into it, there's this artistic expression, this manifestation of the knowledge that I have there. And this can be done in many ways, and the more often it's repeated, the stronger this experience becomes. And then you can just like have it's like quite a new experience, and which I'd like to just like share with you as an example of how this works in my own life. So I happened to be in Jena with Alexander back in July it was, and there was one of the courses that was going on there was run by a lady called Suzanne Best. She's a eurythmist. And she was guiding us through the forms of the building, the Goetheanum, and in a way that I'd never like done before. She was getting us to be the shapes, and she was using it to solve like certain mysteries about certain structures within the building in a wonderful, like, with your whole body sense. So I spent those 3 sessions that I did with her, and then I brought that back home with me, and I was really intrigued by the power of actually living into the form itself, not the movement of the sap, for example, that I was talking about with the trees, but actually just in the form itself. And instead of, and I it's like a new experience of trees. When I looked at the oak, I was more focused on imagining what it was like to have all those leaves, and noticing in a way that I hadn't noticed before that oak leaves tend to be clustered in a lot. It's like in a way that you don't tend to see in other trees, and that's a revelation of something in the way in which oak is sort of like somehow different. And then I was there's lots of birch around us. And by living in the form, the gesture of what's going on, I feel the lightness of the birch, because the birch is like there's lots of air between the leaves, and trying to imagine oneself into that creates a different relationship. I view the birch tree from a perspective that I'd never done before. and I could do that, but then we got lots of pines or conifers in our forest as well, and that was like too much. I couldn't do that. It was I could live myself into the leaves, but there was something sort of like resisting that I could actually live into. It's like each one of those individual needles. And it's not so much about what that reveals about the pine tree, but this aspect of how with different types of exercises, different ways of seeing, different ways of experiencing the plant or any other phenomena in the world, we get to experience aspects that were always there, but which we were blind to before. And this is why it's enriching. It's not this unipolar, this uniform way of the world is matter, end of story, don't need to worry about any. No, we look at it from and experience it from multiple perspectives, and that richness feeds back into us so that we notice things that had always been there, but we'd never consciously become aware of. This is, one of the more recent examples of how this type of thinking feeds into my own experiencing of life.
So
I would like to ask. Sorry, go on, Adana.
Yeah, I was thinking there's one question here in this chapter, or I think more I sort of draw out a question here in this chapter, but it's something that, and just to say, I don't know if we sort of contextualized that we're reading part A that has sort of 3 chapters in the beginning of this book, but maybe it would just be good to say that. And it's from, I think this is the second chapter in this part A, the science of Goethe according to the method of Schiller, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And in the second paragraph, he says, we regard a view founded in the Goethean world conception as true, not because it can be traced back to this world conception, but because we believe that we can support the Goethean worldview upon sound basic principles and present it as one well-founded in itself. And he brings this up also in other parts a little bit, how Goethean science was criticized and applied, or not applied. I think some of you spoke of this in the beginning, how Hegel and Schopenhauer that were trying to appropriate, one could say, Goethean science. So I think it's just interesting, and I don't know how the book will unfold, but I think it's interesting just to realize that, also one thing that Steiner says, that Goethe wasn't able to describe his epistemology, and in a way that is necessary. That is a necessity that Steiner seems to draw up here. And I'm just wondering how you see this necessity, and also how this, from other conversations I've had, or I think even we have shared, if is it a necessity? I mean, in the hard sciences, principles are quite defined. Can we do that with within Goethean science? Can we define it in a way that is approachable but also isn't limiting?
I'd like to begin to attempt an answer to that. It's based along the lines of, and the final chapter of The Philosophy of Freedom is big on this as well, when he talks about gender, but he talks about organic, inorganic in the final chapter, and history, science. And he says that it's like the one of the problems that we can easily succumb to if we have this siloed thinking that's like everything is I can take all of the things that I've learned from inorganic science and I can apply them to organic science, and I can apply them to the social sciences, and I can apply them to it's like an understanding of history. It's understanding the limits of the knowledge and the realm that we've taken it from, which is so key here. And this is one of the from Steiner's perspective, from a spiritual science perspective, this is one of the fundamental failings of our times, that we perceive the only what is made of material is real. And that colors, so that whole, that he uses the German word Gattung. I don't know whether he uses the word species or type in this chapter, but this idea of a gender, perhaps even, we have to be so careful about the problem of moving knowledge that is valid in one realm of experience and saying that that must be true in this realm. And one example is coming to mind now, which is what is the sun? So when the scientific observations indicate that this is like a hugely dense fireball, and this is like gravity. The reason everything circles around the sun is because there's this intense gravity field in there. And this is one thing that Steiner says about this, is that our notion of what the sun is completely wrong. It's like we've got he says they would be surprised at the absolute emptiness that exists in the place of the sun. So whilst physical science will say there's something the gravity is being created by the intense weight, the density of the sun, Steiner will say this isn't really what is going on here. And I don't want to give us a clear alternative on that one, but we can begin to see how science itself becomes to self-contradict with the data. So also the scientific model of the sun is that you've got some nuclear processes which generate a huge amount of heat in the sun. So you've got, let's imagine you've got nuclear fission going on the whole time there, and this is the cause. It's in this super dense structure of the heat, and that permeates out according to our normal understanding of how heat spreads. But even the data there is problematic for this worldview, because actually can't remember the technical terms now exactly for the sun. Is it the troposphere? But anyway, so if you move out from the sun, it actually gets hotter and hotter and hotter for a while. How can that be? If the old model, the standard accepted model is the case, is a contradiction of the model of what the model would predict. So already there we've got evidence that something is amiss. We're applying concepts that we're familiar with on Earth and how heat transmits. And if we look at the sun, and we've got to admit, because that's what the data says, our concepts aren't adequate. And you could add another data point there, which is if you look at sunspots, what are sunspots? They actually allow you to look a little bit deeper into whatever is in the center of the sun. But the problem with these sunspots is they're actually colder than the surrounding region. So that's like looking into a furnace. It's seeing that it's colder in the middle than it is on the outside. So here again, we also have a data point that's saying our current understandings of what heat is and how it's generated, which are valid here on Earth, we have to strongly doubt that that's the case with the sun. This, I hope, sorry, this was just supposed to be an attempt at a beginning to an answer of your question, but this misapplication of concepts outside of their realms, this is the sickness. This is one of the sicknesses that Goethean science is trying to overcome, because it's not like saying, I have all the adequate concepts and I just like, heat works like this on planet Earth and therefore it works like that on the sun. No. A genuine scientist, a phenomenological science will say, I will forget about my conceptual realm that is true here on Earth, and I'll look at the sun and I'll go, whoa, that is different. Something of a fundamentally different nature is going on there. I can't remember exactly what it was that it stimulated you to, that you said, Alex, that stimulated me to say that, but it does feel intimately related to the question that you threw up.
I think that the importance of your question and the importance of that which you draw out, where he says that basically Goethe's method stands on its own. It is the nature of proof itself, because the phenomenon becomes transparent, and so anything that less than that is going to abstract away from the phenomena and is going to abstract away from reality. And we know what happens when we have partial truth produced as technology. It blows up in our faces, literally blows up in our faces. Like what is the nuclear and just stay with the nuclear technology. We call that science, right? But it's half understood phenomena mucked around with, such that we can make it do things, right? And so then the danger then of abstracting from reality is that we confuse our science with our technology, and we don't understand even the implications of the technology as it becomes it becomes itself in a kind of self-generative loop that works back against nature, including human nature. And that, to me, is the story of the 20th century and then into the 21st century now, because we did not heed the work of Goethe. And this is what he's saying about his time. Like, there's no doubt that our culture has been influenced by the German idealists in America. It definitely has. But if we don't take it up, we don't move it into something, we don't metamorphose it, as he's suggesting here for his time and his culture. If we don't metamorphose it, we abstract further and further away from reality, and we have nothing original ourselves to produce as a culture, and we're just artifacts of the past in some way, and we can't keep up with what we're producing then, because we ourselves are not evolving in a way like some. We have what does Daniel Schmachtenberger say? We have the power of gods in the brains of apes, something like that. You know, that we ourselves have not evolved ourselves as an instrument, as part of the natural process, and so can't understand the implications of our action. In fact, plausible deniability is exactly what everybody says when something blows up in their face. Like, how I couldn't know what happened. You know, who knows? That's science. That's how you learn, right? Then I won't get into the last 5 years of pandementia science, but that's why it's important.
I would like to. I need to head out in a short while. If Alexander, did you want to come back? Because I'd like to move us on to a final point, but I didn't want to move on before you'd had a chance to comment.
No, I think just the interesting thing that Jeff was brought up is that in the same way, well, yeah, I think you said something like when we actually see the phenomena, and then Goethean science becomes proof of itself. Or when, I don't remember exactly what you said, but something like that. Is like I can become sure of the way I am applying or seeing through Goethean science when I don't know when, but I'm quite sure that that happened. That it proves itself in that way. It doesn't need any other proof. But at the same time, I had to take steps to get there. In the same way that, try and find a more simple example, but I think in the same way that we can be sure, us three can be sure that Jeff's background wall is green. So we don't need to prove that it is green by any other method than just that we see that it is green. But we had to, I mean, somewhere in our development as childs, we had to sort of fit these two experiences together. What is green and the color green itself. I think that there's these two aspects there that Goethean science proves itself when we see through the open phenomena, but we also need to take steps into it. And that's where I think it's interesting here to just that Steiner presents that that project is there's a necessity of that project. To try and build, as it says, sound basic principles and present it as one well-founded in itself. I don't know, yeah. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to say?
I'm going to go back to the sun to take us to the final chapter. Just that. So you can see this is the structure of the sun, and the common understanding is that this is the absolute hottest part, and the heat like travels out, so the heat gradient should be, it's like decreasing as we move away, should be decreasing. But the reality is that with the sunspots, we see that this is actually colder as I move in. And as we move out into the chromosphere, the photosphere and the chromosphere, it actually continues to increase for a certain point. How is that relevant to this final chapter? Because he's talking about that we are also misapplying concepts to what knowledge is. And the principal task of this work, and it's like the ascertaining the principles, the axioms of Goethean science, or the Goethean epistemology, the Goethean's theory of knowledge, is identical with Steiner's, and it's trying to resolve this difference. It's like the interrelationship between the ideal world, it's like the world of concepts that we have, and the world of appearances. That the Kantian view has the Kantian view of what we are as human beings and our knowledge and its relationship to the world is mucked up. And this is what needs correcting, and this is what there's like the rest of the 18 chapters it is in the book are going to be focusing on. And right at the final end of this chapter, apart from saying we seek to understand these relationships, he asks these really interesting questions, which we've already lifted here. It's like in this, what is the significance of the mirroring of the outer world in human consciousness? this is what we are trying to come to terms with, but we can only do it with a correct epistemology. And Steiner says how Schiller has identified Goethe as having this theory of knowledge that is not siloed up and trying to impose its truths on other realms where it doesn't belong, because instead it is letting those different realms of experience speak their truths to the human being. And this is why it can be deemed true by Lessing and Haeckel and Hegel and Schopenhauer, all these contradictory ones, because they are just viewing it from one point of view. And then this is the last sentence, which I love. He says, "What is the relationship between thinking about things and those things in themselves?" He's playing on this Kantian idea, and that we've got to, what does it, that Ding an sich, which is behind a metaphysical curtain in the Kantian worldview, Goethe and Steiner saying, it isn't. It's there. It's in front of us. That is what created it in appearance. And when we have intuited the concept, the adequate concept, it's merely a process of recognition. That spirit that lives out there in that phenomena is the same spirit that is living within me. And this is where these curious statements like the tree outside me is not outside me become resolved, because in my thinking sphere, it is part of me. Physically, yep, physically it's outside of me, but I only know it through thinking, and thinking is my own activity. I am intimately linked to the activity of thinking, and therefore I recognize that being as actually living within me at the same time. So it's so striking how if you listen to Oriental truths, I am, that I am, I think that yes, these ideas that there is no distinction between me and the rest of the world, we are finding them expressed here in a modern scientific language, but still pointing to the same essential truth. If I understand myself as a spiritual being, there is no distance, there is no time, there is no space. I think this is what he is pointing to in this chapter 3, which he calls the task of science. Yeah.
Can I say something also? Because I think what you're saying reminded me of, and I'm not sure if it's Steiner. Someone told me that it's Aristotle that has said this, but I also believe I've read it in Steiner, and I don't know if it's a quote, or not. But never mind. But the idea is that the final metamorphosis of a natural phenomena is its appearance as a true concept in the human mind, which for me relates also to this final question, how the objects out there and our thinking about them are related. It's how they become within us a true reality that we can then participate in.
Yeah, that's I think that's from Philosophy of Freedom. It basically says, who are we to say that, in a sense, one could say, well, that's an egotistical statement, Alexander. I mean, you as a human being are the fulfillment of all creation when you have a concept, right?
True.
But this is process, right? And we're part of a universal process. It's us abstracting ourselves away from our universality. In other words, we don't ground ourselves in our expansion.
Right.
That would be so egotistical, actually, to say that something like human beings are the scourge of the earth, something like that. It's like that there's no humility in that. Like, there's self-hatred, yes, but that's self-absorbed, and that's not humility. What you're saying, what we're saying, this is a good place to end it, I think, too, because this opens the question, like, what is thinking's role in the universe? Is it an organizing principle that we're participating in? Is it the ground of existence? And if so, what sort of idiotic humanity would deny that responsibility to fulfill? That's my question. Not like can we overcome the subject object divide, or are we one worlders or two worlders, or if you make claims that you're a one worlder, you're a two worlder. That's all there is to it. You're a child of Kant. You're a child of Hume. There's subject object duality, and you're not taking the responsibility to think. And is thinking a universal process? Can we discover it within this context?
The answer to that question and many others are coming. Certainly, but part of those answers are coming in the next 3 chapters on experience. I can't remember the title for those. That section of 3 there, but definitely that's where he's going to be taking us in the conversations, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, absolutely.
Me too.
A delightful ground laying, I would say, we've done.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh,
he's off. He was not kidding around. He had to get out of here.
That was quick.
Yeah, it was. He tore the Band-Aid off. He's still recording, though. It looks like to me. There he is.
Sorry, I thought that wasn't supposed to happen.
You were trying to stop recording, and you
I tried to do stop recording, and of course
you negated yourself from the whole world process. You're not supposed to do that.
Okay, I found the stop recording button now. I'll edit this out. Okay.
All right.